Alright, it's time for me to be honest with you and with myself. Deadeye Eddie Reviews is never coming back. I keep saying I'm going to do it and then not doing it. I have no desire to do it. Maybe someday it'll come back. Maybe someday I'll have thousands or hundreds of subscribers and I'll be making plenty of money and I'll have all the time in the world to make these stupid videos. That's not me now. So, until further notice, Deadeye Eddie Reviews is cancelled. So here's a new show I'm starting. I talk a lot on this channel about directors who only make one movie that is so bad it ends up on my show. So to counteract this, I wanted to start a show where I talk about directors who made one movie that was a really good movie. And as it turns out, those hardly exist. I mean, I was trying to find someone like Harper Lee who had had one success and decided that was enough, or someone who was all set to have a great career and abruptly died, or, well, anything. But no, good films from one-time directors is a real rarity. At best, you're Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas, and you make a movie based on your comedy albums, and it's fine. There's also Saul Bass, a man known for making opening titles, who would make the film Phase 4, which a lot of people seem to like, but I thought it was a bunch of technobabble with a not-at-all scary villain. It's seriously about ants teaming up to kill people. In the end, I did come up with a few I think will make interesting videos, but to me, none more interesting than Herk Harvey and Carnival of Souls. Herk Harvey directed educational short films, like the kind you'd see on MST3K. In fact, one of them was on MST3K.
Because you're bad at math?
Yeah, the guy who made that made this. In fact, there's an odd history between MST3K and Harvey. Not only have several of his short films showed up in Riff Trax short specials, but Michael J. Nelson actually did an audio commentary for Carnival of Souls on an official DVD release. The only other instance I know of this happening is Plan 9 from Outer Space. Harvey worked for Syntron Films, where he would direct nearly 50 of these types of films, along with his final directing gig on an episode of Reading Rainbow in 1983. Yeah, the director of Carnival of Souls directed an episode of Reading Rainbow. That's like finding out George Romero did segments for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Oh yeah, that happened too. So, how does one, in the midst of teaching people about everything from workplace safety to pork products, make one of the most highly praised horror films of the 1960s? Well, like everything, it starts with an idea. Herk Harvey had a crew of people he worked with on all his short films, and among them was John Clifford. Harvey came to Clifford with one idea for a scene. He wanted the movie to end with a bunch of ghouls dancing in an abandoned carnival. This has become by far the most iconic scene from this movie. If you've seen anything from this movie, you've seen this scene. 3 weeks later, Clifford came back with the script for Carnival of Souls. Now all they had to do was fund it. According to Harvey, they eventually raised $30,000 to make this movie, which is nothing. Even adjusting for inflation, that's only around $245,000, which for a film is pretty low. Now imagine I told you all this. This guy who directed industrial shorts decided to make a horror movie on less than $30,000, and add on top of that, it was his only film, and it was released on a double bill with something called The Devil's Messenger. And you'd probably guess this is some giant Gila monster level shit. But no, it's one of the most beloved horror movies of all time. Maybe that's an overstatement, but it certainly is a well-loved movie, and something way better than you'd expect out of that situation. It has a 7.2 on IMDb, Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars, and it's been cited by many directors as an inspiration. Many critics have pointed out the similarities it has to the careers of George Romero and David Lynch. it has a Criterion release. So I think it's fair to call this a beloved horror movie. It's hard to go over the plot without just giving everything away, so if you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. It's public domain, so you can watch it for free right there. Okay, now that you've seen it, recapping the plot seems pointless, but here it is for people who maybe haven't seen it in a while. Story revolves around Mary Henry, played by Candice Hilgos, another first in the movie industry. She and her friends get in a car wreck, and she's the only survivor. But in the days after the event, a strange man continues to follow her around. This ghoulish man is actually played by director Herk Harvey himself, and he beckons her to join him at the abandoned carnival on the pier, where she finds the dancing ghouls. Only then can her soul move on to the afterlife, and it's revealed she died in the car accident at the beginning. I'll admit, the twist is a bit obvious, although this was 1962, so maybe it wasn't as obvious then. Plus, I think the movie is more interesting knowing that detail. It presents kind of a disturbing look at an afterlife where someone clings to the realm of the living without even realizing it. One of the biggest things Carnival of Souls did was filming scenes on an Arriflex 35, one of the most lightweight cameras available in the 60s. And typically these cameras were reserved for newsreels, but Harvey's crew got a hold of one. And this was not some artistic choice, this was out of necessity. They couldn't afford rear projection, which was the typical method of simulating a driving car, so they put the camera in a car. They couldn't afford dollies or cranes, but with this, they were still mobile. And Christ, the soundtrack. The soundtrack is perhaps the single most important element of a good horror movie, and Carnival of Souls knocks it out of the park. The music for this film was composed by Gene Moore, who apparently didn't go on to any other films, which just astounds me. No, just like Harvey, he stuck to industrial short films. So the question you're probably asking is, why didn't we see more of this guy? I mean, this was the decade that gave us names like George Romero and Dario Argento. Where did Herk Harvey go? Let me make one thing clear. Just because this movie is a critical success now does not mean it was financially successful. Although I can't actually say whether it was or wasn't because I can't find any box office revenue for it. At first I assumed this was because it was an independent film from the 60s. That's the type of information that could just get lost through the years, but it seems in this case the simplest explanation was not the truth. See, Harvey was just a dude from Kansas who made a film on a couple $1,000. He didn't really know much about the film industry. So when a brand new company called Hertz Lion International came looking for movies to pad their filmography, Harvey just took it. After all, it was more distribution than he was likely to get. And a few weeks after the premiere, with no payment, Hertz Lion disappeared with all the money they made off this and a handful of other movies. That's according to this interview with Harvey himself. I couldn't find any information on Hertz Lion outside of their logo and the fact that they distributed Carnival of Souls. Not that it was likely to make that much money, as they somehow forgot to put a copyright date on the film, meaning it automatically fell into the public domain, which in turn meant TV stations could play this film without paying Harvey a cent in royalties. And that's exactly what they did. And I hate to say this, because I think Herk Harvey deserves every penny coming his way. But it found its audience on TV. If it had been copywritten, especially considering how quickly Hertz Lion disappeared, there's a very good chance we would not have this movie today. So Harvey had a job making industrial films that was making him money. His venture into film had made him nothing. If you were Herk Harvey, would you make another movie? He did actually try to get a few others off the ground, but none of them went anywhere. He was just too busy with Centron Films. Which is unfortunate. In a time where so many influential voices were coming out, Harvey should have been a part of that, but instead he got screwed and left behind merely one movie. Harvey would retire from industrial films in '83 and passed away in 1996 of pancreatic cancer at the ripe old age of 71. Writer John Clifford would work with Harvey on his industrial films until '81. He died in 2010 at the age of 91. Both have been honored by a Kansas Film Institute, though I couldn't find which one. Not that there's an abundance of film institutes in Kansas. Additionally, the soundstage at Kansas University was officially christened the Herk Harvey Soundstage shortly after his death. The story of Carnival of Souls is, quite literally, a one-of-a-kind story. A film that has inspired so many others, one that has found a real place among American horror classics, and it was made by a man with a filmography of one. Lots of people direct just one movie and that's it, but none of these movies can touch the success Carnival of Souls has seen. But a few come pretty close. So join me next time, whenever that might be, and we'll talk more about directors with a filmography of one.